one thing I always say to people is you reserve the right to change your mind. If you do something and you later realize it's not working, or there's new information, new circumstances, and you need to do something different now, you can change your mind, right? But you need to make the call and go and really commit to it to know if it's going to have any chance of success. So I think those are a couple things that can kind of make that a challenging transition, and yet pretty important, right?
Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they're always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people. In just a moment, I'll be joined by Ross Romano, a leadership coach, former comm strategist, and co-founder of the B Podcast Network, a 50-plus show powerhouse in the education and leadership space. Ross has spent his career coaching mid-career professionals, startup founders, and enterprise leaders to get unstuck by helping them align their values, vision, and team dynamics. Ross and I are going to explore why leaders sabotage themselves by doing too much, the 3 traits every trustworthy leader has, and how to make decisions that stick without losing sleep. So Ross, what makes moving from vision to decision one of the most challenging aspects when it comes to leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect question to start with. It really is, and it's the critical piece of both parts, right? Because I think establishing and knowing and truly like believing in what the vision is, communicating that, and being consistent in referring back to it as the guide for decisions is a piece where organizations and individuals kind of often go wrong, right? That mission, vision, values piece is only words on a page somewhere. And we forget when we have small and big calls to make day to day, are we referring to that? Are we consistent with that? But then putting that into action. So one, it's the connective piece of saying, are our decisions informed by that vision? Are we making decisions that are consistent with who we are and what we should do, right? That in any organization, most things are not objectively the right thing to do. It's subjective based on who is your organization, who works there, what do you stand for, what's important to you, right? So it's important to make that. And then also there's a time for planning and a time for doing. and getting that balance right can be difficult. We can overthink things or hold back on making a call or going forward with something because we're not 100% sure how it's going to turn out, and you can't control that. And one thing I always say to people is you reserve the right to change your mind. Like, if you do something and you later realize it's not working, or there's new information, new circumstances, and you need to do something different now, you can change your mind, right? But you need to make the call and go and really commit to it to know if it's going to have any chance of success. So I think those are a couple things that can kind of make that a challenging transition, and yet pretty important, right?
Very important. In your experience, maybe it's 50-50, but where do you think you see leaders and organizations struggle more? Is it on the action part, or is it just creating that vision for their company?
I'd say it's the vision piece, and then that leads to the problems with decision making piece, right? Because again, those decisions and what is the right thing for you to do, what's the right thing for your organization to invest in, who's the right hire to make, what's the right way to expand your product portfolio, whatever those calls are. It needs to be consistent with that unique vision for where you're trying to go, who you serve, what you're trying to do for them. And if you track even sort of the major case studies of large businesses, and you see where they did some kind of rollout of, we overhauled our product, it was new Coke, or it was, some product that Apple put out that failed. It kind of tracks back to, what the benefit of hindsight being, we should have known that was the wrong thing in the first place, right? Because it wasn't consistent with what we set out to do. It wasn't consistent with what our customers expect from us. And why do we make that decision? And because they either thought we're going to try to, head off some environmental factors, we're going to try to get ahead of something our competitors doing. When realistically, if you are the best version of who your organization is, or the best version of who you are as a leader, that's the best you can do, right? And that you need to really understand that independently of what somebody else is doing. And that comes back to what is our vision? What are our goals? And it's refining it over time, but that requires referring back to it, I think. So, yeah, I would say like the problems typically tend to stem from there. When organizations are really clear about that piece, they tend to make pretty good decisions.
Where do you help your customers? What is step one with figuring out your vision?
Step one, I like to do a pretty holistic review of things, and it's the inner connection, of course, between leader and organization. So a lot of my work has been with founders, so they're pretty closely tied there, right? But it's looking at the entirety of what they do, who they serve, and really, really, really diving into who is that audience? What are their pain points, their challenges? What are their goals, right? What do they aspire to? What can I give them that helps them move forward? How am I educating them, teaching them something new, giving them something that makes their life more successful, a little bit easier, whatever it is? And then really get into how can we differentiate in that, right? Because most of the time, there's very few companies or organizations that I would say are wholly unique in what they do, right? But they do need to have a unique identity around it, a unique way of developing relationships to a customer base, or defining what their value prop is. So we really like to dive into that. And I always start everything in those cases with thinking about who are those audiences? What are their personas? What are their pain points? What are they really hoping that you can solve for them? And you need to be, inspiring a vision around that, and then adopting it internally, right? Communicate. Everybody in your organization needs to understand that, buy into it. If people don't believe in it, then it's probably just not the right place for them, not in a harsh way, but it shouldn't be something that people necessarily find out later. Everybody coming in should really know this is what this organization is. This is what they stand for. This is the culture. And I'm going to have a feeling pretty early on if I come in for an interview, seems like a nice place, but I don't know if it's really the thing that I care about, right? And so we kind of just start with all of that, and then we get into, of course, the wordsmithing and figuring out what that means and how do we actually execute on it. But so much of it, whether individually or as an organization, is you need to know what you want and how to learn that, right?
And I think you bring up a good point. There are very few solely unique companies. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of, red ocean, so to speak, mm-hmm. and value prop. I know I've struggled with that at Learn It, because there's 1,000 learning and development companies, and, a lot of industries are kind of in the same thing. So how do you help an organization? We don't have to go through the whole process, but when it comes to value prop, how do you find a couple levers maybe that can set you apart?
Yeah. So one step of it that's pretty important is to understand who else is in the market. What are they doing? Right. And I think what happens a lot of times is a company will be attempting to establish a differentiator around something that's not a differentiator. It's not different from what everybody else is doing. It's possible to maybe say, everybody's doing this, we're going to do it better, but that requires a different way of defining it, right? But it also, I think it just comes right back to that audience again, and thinking about what are their unmet needs, what are their unanswered questions, what are the other players in the space failing to identify here and speak to. and make it as narrowly defined as possible. It really niche down on that. That doesn't need to be a scary thing, to say we're going to define this really narrowly, right? It doesn't mean that's the only thing you do, but you need to give people a reason to want to know more about you. So what are the one or two things that are going to pique their interest, that are going to make them come and see if those questions get answered? You can then have a conversation about other problems you can solve if that's what you endeavor to do. But yeah, the red ocean, blue ocean problem is a good one, because I do think that there are a lot of times when there's color blindness, right? Where there's an organization that thinks they're in a blue ocean, and it's like, no, this is a crowded space, and you're kind of failing to set yourself apart.
I think that's a good point. And I think there's some color blindness too, as well as how you add value or serve your customers, especially if you don't ask them. Because a lot of times you think you're adding value one way, but they perceive it a different way. And needing to understand really the intersection of that is incredibly important. And I like what you say about niching down. That is hard, because it takes a little courage, because you think that if you have this wide range of products, big catalog, that's going to be better. But at the end of the day, that might even just confuse people and be the wrong way to go. So the more you can niche down, the better. Last question around value prop. In today's rapidly changing world, how often do you think an organization should assess their value prop?
That's a great question. I would say at least annually, if not a little more frequently. But what does that look like, right? It could mean just sort of a quarterly review of, have we been consistent in establishing what our value is? Are we seeing alignment between what we're hearing and finding is resonating with our customer base and how we've defined it, right? Are there places where, people keep telling us the thing they really like about us is this, and that's not part of how we're defining ourselves? Do we need to rethink that, right? So that's so much around, one, like identifying where have we made maybe a couple of decisions or gone in a couple of directions that was inconsistent with what we know we're best at, or what are we learning from the marketplace? And then on a longer timeline, right, annually or so, you might be looking more broadly, should we be doing something differently? Should we be phasing out a certain service or prioritizing another one? You don't want to be doing that all the time, because then you're never going to really be committed to things. You're never going to see it through, have enough of a sample size to learn what's really working. If you know that you made a direction and built a strategy based on the right inputs, and you had a solid approach to it, you have to have the courage of your convictions in that. And it's like, trust the process, right? Like, it might take a little bit of time, and we need to look at those little indicators for that. But we more regularly should be saying, what is the reason why we're feeling like things aren't happening the way we wanted, because we're not actually doing what we said we were going to do, right? Versus, okay, we need to overhaul our entire structure here.
Yeah, no, good point. I want to take it back. Let's talk a little bit about your career. I mean, you have a podcast network, the B Podcast Network, with I believe over 50 shows in it, and the majority of your work, at least from what I can tell, has been around the education space. So I'm curious what led you to it, what made you passionate about the education space, and then talk a little bit about your podcast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I largely got into the education space almost by chance, because it was a more geographic priorities around other things in my life, versus that it was a grand plan. But I very quickly learned, this is the right place for me. Very quickly understood the opportunity to make an impact. And
how do you know it was the right place for you?
Because it's such a good space to be able to influence access and opportunity at all levels, to really think about, and this is true in all different parts of education, whatever that looks like. Certainly work that I do in the K-12 space, but I carry the same values into coaching work that I do with mostly mid-career professionals, other types of endeavors where it's like, what are the things that we know people will benefit from? How do we ensure that they're getting access to that we're removing barriers to access and giving them the tools to create opportunity for themselves? And so in education, it's far from a solved problem. There's a lot of good things that are always happening, but there also are a lot of instances where students are not having equal opportunity at that, right? And so it kind of is motivating to continue saying, you know what, knowing that this is hard work, particularly when you're dealing with, the vast public institutions and all of the complications and intricacies of how every state functions a little bit differently and how funding mechanisms work and the timelines on things, right? That it really requires a lot of resilience and dedication. And it takes people that really care about that to see it through. And so when you can say, this is an enormous opportunity to make an impact, and if not me, then I don't know who, right? There's not always a line of people that are looking to sign up for something that's that challenging. So it has really continued to be good in that space. And it is something that's been a lot of fun about it is it can be kind of a small world industry as well, that for as large as it is, as many billions of dollars as are involved in education, the learning industry, ed tech, all these associated industries. It really is a community of people that you keep coming back to and finding new ways to collaborate and like-minded individuals wanting to kind of solve these challenges. So that part of it it's a lot of fun as that develops over time and you recognize these opportunities to go back and start a new project with somebody that you worked with 5 years ago, right?
And with the people you coach or the ed tech companies or K through 12, the leaders, would you say that they experience similar kind of challenges that people in the corporate world do as well compared to your corporate coaches, or do you think it's different?
Yeah. So in my coaching, actually most of the people that I've coached are in more corporate environments, I would say.
Okay.
Big tech or law, those kind of industries, some of the really big firms, and largely folks in mid-career who are at that pivot point of really needing to define, I think, what is the problem that they're feeling, right? Am I in the right industry? Am I in the right company? What are my options? And I was listening to the recent episode you did talking about the 5 books that have influenced your leadership. And one of them was the Heath Brothers book, Decisive. And one thing that stood out in there and really aligned with the process I go through with people is the difference it can make even to introduce that third option, right? And sometimes there's more than 3, but I think a lot of people, they've come at that point and it's kind of like, should I stay or should I go? Right? I'm feeling like I'm not advancing the way I want to in my career, or I'm frustrated by something, or I don't necessarily, I'm not happy. And so should you leave the company? Should you change careers entirely? Should you stay? What can you change about your circumstances where you are, right? What are the things that you might be able to do to get what you want where you are that you haven't tried? And then look at those options and determine which path might you want to go. What can you try short term? What can you try long term? But I think the challenge is there's a lot of consistency in challenges, whether it is education, corporate, more startup endeavors, where it comes back to relationship to leadership. And right, do I feel as though I'm working for people who I trust, who I understand what they want from me, that we have a good relationship in that way? And it comes down to identifying what are your objectives and priorities in your professional life and personal life, and what's the best way to make them fit together. And sometimes 90 minutes, you can solve most of your biggest problems with the right guided discussion. Sometimes it takes a little longer. But yeah, it looks a little different environment by environment, but there are the foundational things are pretty common.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. So with one of your coaching clients, do you have an example of where you've helped them add a third option? So it's not binary anymore. Should I stay or should I go? They added a third option and it turned into a success story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of one occasion where somebody who was certainly in a large, corporate environment, one of the largest market cap companies out there, but was at one of those critical points where I've been in my role for, a number of years, and I can see that if now is the time, right? The next couple of years are going to be pretty determinative of the direction my career is going to take, right? Do I get a promotion into the role that I really have my eye on? And if I don't, if I kind of miss the window, 5-10 years can pass and I realize I'm not on track, right? So, the initial two options I would say it was mostly stay or go type of thing, right? And it was, do I stay here and hope that I get what I want? Or do I look and see if there's another place where I can get hired into a position that I really desire? And we expanded that into at least 3, but if not more options, but certainly looked at, okay, 1, how do we potentially create what you want where you are? What would that look like? What are the conversations that you need to have, right? Does your supervisor know that you want that? Have you discussed that, right? Have you been clear about, these are my goals, these are my objectives? Are you otherwise happy where you are, right? I mean, all things considered, moving jobs can be disruptive, right? So which option has the higher chance of leading to fulfillment? Is it switching organizations entirely and going to a new place where you might find, I really don't like it here? Or is that potentially the better option? And you have to really drill down on that. Also, what else is happening outside of work that's important to you? And that's a big factor as well. So, in this case, it was more of a direction of creating new opportunities within the organization. To have those discussions ended up resulting in cross-functional opportunities, right? Oh, now that I've had these conversations with my supervisor about what I'm interested in, I was assigned to work with another department on this project. Now I'm getting to build new alliances internally. Now I am having more advocates for me, right? And now we're also establishing, I talk about agreements versus expectations, which is a a concept that gets talked a lot about by a coach named Steve Chandler, but it's, expectations being kind of one-sided, right? It's something that largely a lot of leaders operate off expectations. And even if they're explicit, you have to do this and this, but there was no two-way input into how is that going to look, what resources are needed to make it happen, what's a realistic timeline for making it happen, all of that kind of stuff. It always leads to disappointment. And even if things go the way you expected, you kind of take it for granted because you didn't realize what agreements being co-created, bilateral, like we need to sit down. And when we exit this, we both have the exact same understanding of what's required, what it's going to look like, what support is going to be provided, and what we are wanting to get out of it. And so creating those agreements leads to that lack of ambiguity, and clarity around what it takes to get there. And so when you get to that annual performance review or whatever, whether it's formal or informal, I already know before I go in there what is going to happen because we had an agreement about it. We both knew, right? And I know if we did it or we didn't do it. My supervisor, my boss, CEO, whoever it is, knows what I'm looking to get out of it. So it's not, there's no guesswork there. So a lot can be achieved. It's simple concept, not always easy in execution, but a lot can be achieved by pushing a little deeper, right? That extra step to say, we haven't totally finished this because we have not really had that dialogue and taken the time to get everything cleared up.
I think that's a great point that our listeners should take into consideration. That's why it's great to work with a coach who can help push you a little bit, like you're saying right there. Because a couple of things I heard is, you could sit there and you could hope this happens, right? But have you taken the initiative to have a conversation, like you mentioned, with your boss to let them know what you want? Have you thought about what it's like going somewhere else and maybe the grass isn't greener on the other side? These are all different things you should take into consideration. And I love the fact you're bringing up Stephen Chandler. I'm a big fan of his work. He has this great little audio piece on victim mentality versus accountability, which I think is fantastic. Now, Ross, you brought up earlier, you said leaders that people want to follow and trust. And you've worked with founders, entrepreneurs, you're a leader yourself. What qualities do you think are the most important for leaders to have to get people to want to follow and trust them?
Yeah. So it was sort of just through different writing I was doing and started to clarify some of these ideas, but they've held up pretty true. I have this thing called the 3 cons, which you think is bad, but it's conscientiousness, constancy, and consistency, right? And I think it applies almost anywhere that, conscientious. I want a leader that cares about the work, that is invested, that cares about me, right? That is ethical, that wants to do the right thing. That's somebody that I can, even if I don't agree with how they think about everything, I know that they're doing things for a good reason. The constancy piece, I want to know what I'm going to get. Right? You want to, when you show up day to day, you want to have somebody who has emotional regulation, right? Somebody who has decency. There's room for different types of personalities, but nobody feels comfortable, especially to stretch themselves or to try things, go out of their way, if you don't know if one day you're going to get your hand slapped, the next day it's going to be okay, and it's erratic. And consistency, like similarly, but consistency is around, I think, that vision and values piece. Like, is there a consistent logic and rationale for the decisions that are made, the approach that we go on things, right? And so it's a little bit less about the personalities and emotion and relationships, and more about, is it consistent and is it communicated so that it's making everybody smarter and better, because I understand why we do things the way we do. Now I can apply that to my work. I'm getting better. I'm doing work that's being appreciated because I am delivering on organizational values, right? And again, we're not forgetting about what we stand for here and doing a bunch of things that don't make a whole lot of sense. I can track what's happening. And if those three, this can look a lot of different ways, but typically if those things are present, the trust level can be high. I know that I can have a conversation about things. I know that I understand the parameters of what I'm expected to do, what my work is. And then the rest of it flows from there, right? The ways that people are empowered, the way that they're given opportunities to grow. There's a lot of other things that leaders need to do, but I consistently have found in good examples and bad examples, right, that those three are a real strong starting point for whether or not it's going to be a positive environment for a team.
Out of those three, which one do you think that leaders tend to struggle with the most?
I would say that's a great question. I would say in some ways it could be the conscientiousness, because I think one of the things that is understandably difficult, the way that organizations work, is that it can be challenging, or it can seem in conflict to prioritize the organization and also my own career outcomes. And I think that's where the conflict can come from, is when are leaders who have a responsibility to the people that they're serving feeling like they should be doing things that maybe are advantaging them, but not necessarily serving, right? And the consistency, we certainly have talked about that with the vision to decision piece, and that comes up there a lot too. But I would say that the conscientiousness shows up in a lot of ways, and it also can be a struggle when you just start to lose your enthusiasm for the work or the organization, right? And it can drain that, and it can just look like not necessarily that somebody is backsliding on ethics, but that their energy level for really committing to doing the things that matter can wane. And then as a result, the energy level for supporting the team wanes. So that's a way that I would see that manifest as a struggle.
What about when working with founders? You mentioned a moment ago empowering your team. Do you find that with founders, they struggle with that because they feel like they got to they have a hard time delegating? They feel like they have to have their hands in everything and get everything done?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it can be hard, right? It's hard. That's a difficult transition from, particularly if you're a founder as a solopreneur or a very small team, and you start out having to do everything yourself and feeling like it's hard to make that transition to, I have a bigger team now. You establish the vision, but once you have a team, it's no longer just your vision, right? It's everybody's. And so you need to give people an opportunity to contribute to that and to do the work. But it can be a tug of war between feeling like we need to micromanage. And that's why the communication piece is so important, and the clarity around that, to understand, have we all gotten clear on what we do here, why we do it, how we do it? if I've done my job, and look, I struggle with this myself. So, it's not hypocrisy, but it's if I've done my job to have communicated those things, shown how it works, right? Allowed people to have the opportunity to really understand that, to know why we do what we do and how, so that they can start making those same decisions themselves and understanding what would be beneficial. They need to be empowered, and, and you're still accountable for everything that happens. It just looks different. Right? I think that's a piece too. Like a lot of founders, certainly they have that ownership and that accountability, and they feel like, well, if I'm accountable for it, then I need to do it because then I know that I'm accountable. And ultimately you can't really grow like that, right? You're still accountable for the people in your organization and what they do. And if they make a mistake or something happens with a customer, the buck stops with you, and then you have to handle it. But if you've done the right things to find the right people, train them, invest in them, right? Help them understand the work, help them get better. You're going to not have the fear that you have. But a lot of times, right, it's hard to make that transition from I'm the sole driver here to my job now is more to cultivate the rest of the team.
I mean, the bottom line is, if you want to hire great talent, bring in great talent, if you put them in a box, they're going to leave, or they're going to be just demotivated and not passionate about it. And you brought up a good point, and I think you and I even spoke about this on your sidelines, your podcast, where when you're a leader, you got to win through your team. In baseball, you can't go on the field if you're a coach and hit the ball for them. So you need to be able to put the right people in place. You need to have their backs. You need to have, help them, give them feedback and learn and grow. And I think that's so important. And it's very, very difficult. It took me about 20 years to figure out how to delegate better. Yeah. I got a question. Earlier we were talking about your passion for being in education. And that's something that I bet is very, very common for principals, for leaders of all levels of the education world. When do you see people who've maybe been in the education field for 10, 20 years, where they end up leaving the field and they go in a different direction? Are they losing their passion for it, or is there something else out there that's causing them, like poor leadership, to make them want to leave?
What I have found, and I've had a lot of conversations about this, I've actually did some white papers on it a few years ago. It's really rare that the passion goes away, or the interest in the mission of that work. But the number one reason is leadership. There's a unique element of that in education, particularly if it's in schools and school systems, where I think a lot of people perceive, if they're in their first school, for example, a teacher, and they teach there for a number of years, they perceive that maybe overgeneralize their experience to what the entire profession is like. And so that's why sometimes it might result in leaving the profession entirely versus maybe thinking, maybe I should go to a different school or kind of change roles here, right? Because it just feels like it's so difficult and challenging. And it is that way anywhere, but it can, your experience is much different depending on how leadership is, if they're supporting you, if they're doing all the things that we know good leaders do versus they're not. So, that's where there's an opportunity to also have better communication about that there is a variety of experience in different types of organizations. And, the other is just like the burnout, the overwork, which it all traces back to leadership as well, because it's like the failure to anticipate where those common challenges are, the failure to proactively provide resource and support, and to communicate with the community, with the stakeholders about what we do, why we do it, so that we are generating that support and buy-in, because that emotional toll, when it is a really hard job day to day, you have dozens of young people, right? Depending on the age, they could be quite young. And that's difficult enough as it is. And then when you're doing that and being questioned about it or not being given credit for the dedication, it can just feel like what's the point of this, right? And when you get to the point where I feel like I can no longer make a difference, I haven't lost my belief in the importance of what it is or my desire to do so. In fact, like quite the opposite. I know that what's important about this is making a difference. And I feel like I'm not, then I feel like I just shouldn't be here anymore. So I've seen that happen a lot. And so, again, not wholly unique from what might happen in other places, but that's really where it is. So there's been some positive steps as far as creating other opportunities, right? Other opportunities to leave one type of role organization, but still be involved in the industry, maybe in a private sector role or other ways of collaborating and supporting educators and students. But yeah, the top two things were like problems with leadership and the feeling that I can no longer make a difference.
I no longer feel like I can make a difference is a big one, because like you said, you're not losing the passion for it. You care, and but you feel like you're at a point where you just can't do anything. Mm-hmm. It's got to be incredibly frustrating. My mother-in-law was a 3rd to 5th grade school teacher for 43 years and spent a lot of time in her house. And man, I have the utmost respect for the work that she puts in. It's so hard. And just the communication that you talked about, which is so important everywhere, or the lack thereof it, and the change of directions. I don't think I could have put up with it like she did. If you could wave a magic wand and just make the education system a little bit better, not overall, but even for the teachers and the people and the principals in it, what would you do?
Boy, how powerful is that wand?
Powerful.
I think the simplest, let's take the hard answer. I think the easiest answer and the truest would be, to ensure that resources weren't limited, right? That every school everywhere had as much money as they needed to properly fund their curricular materials, their facilities, to pay their educators appropriately, right? And to make sure that every student, no matter where they went to school, had access to the same level of resources and quality. And if that were the case, a lot could be done with that. But if I were to take a different approach, it would be to influence public opinion, to have communities, understand and value and give the benefit of the doubt to the level of care and commitment that the people working in those schools have. And if that were the approach and if that were the attitude, that would change a lot of things too, right? When the work I'm doing is really hard, but the people I'm doing it for understand that, right? And they're going to give me grace around that. They're maybe going to step up to see how they can help, versus being a little more antagonistic or thinking that if things aren't going the way they should, it's because I'm not trying, or I don't care, or I have some other agenda. The dynamics and relationships would change so much, and it would make a humongous difference.
So you think that the public opinion, there's an issue with that. What is the public opinion in your perspective?
Well, yeah, and I don't know if it's always public opinion, or sometimes it's individual, I guess, the way that people treat each
me
other.
Personally, it's like, what could be more important than giving our kids a great education to become great future leaders, so the world's a better place in the future?
Yeah. Public opinion might be not always. I mean, it is and it's not, because I think when they've done, surveys on this, we've seen that people have a pretty positive opinion of their local school, but then they have like a negative opinion broadly. But I think a lot of it just comes down to the way that we treat each other and interact as a society and as communities, right? And the way that we give people, and try to empathize and understand what people are trying to do, try to see how can we be constructive and supportive versus having a little bit more of a oppositional view, or there's just been a lot of that happens. I mean, I see it personally, more than professionally, and you see the difference it can make, and you know how deflating it is. And anybody can relate to this. You don't have to be in this profession, but the feeling of when you know what you've put into the work that you're doing, and you're giving it the best effort that you can, and you know that you're in it for all the right reasons, the difference it can make in just the way somebody approaches you and asks about it. It's a parent, it's a colleague, it's whomever, right? And if sometimes it's subtle nuances, but sometimes it's more that just the competitive nature of society and the worries that come out of, is everything that a 6-year-old does, how's that going to affect their opportunity at a good college kind of thing? But that it can create these really hostile interactions, when the inverse being, if we are approaching it as we all are on the same side and have the same goals and want to make this happen, and we can discuss it and we can work together, that's a lot different, right? Versus that we're kind of in opposition here, and my job is to get you to do what I want you to do versus to work with you so that we both can get what we want.
Well, I love what you mentioned about those stories, those one-off stories about how you've had a great impact in people's lives, and the difference teachers have made, and things like that. And that kind of leads into kind of like our final segment here. I kind of want to talk about is your B Podcast network. I believe you have over 50 podcasts. I've been on 2 of them. There's 48 more out there. It's tied into education. So can you share a little bit about how you co-founded it, what the idea was behind it, and what impact it's had?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was sort of a long time in the making, in a sense. My co-founder, Jethro Jones, has been, he was one of the original kind of principal podcasters.
That's a cool name, by the way, Jethro Jones.
It is. It's memorable, right?
Yeah.
And he was one of the original principal podcasters, and he's been doing his show, Transformative Principal, for more than 700 episodes. So more than a decade. And we had the chance to get to know one another over the years. I was working in communications and PR, and we connected around a number of guests and some different things we collaborated on. He used to do some virtual professional development summits in the summers, and I would help support those. And in parallel, I had been doing more behind the scenes podcast stuff for a decade or so, and branded podcast series, working with different companies on creating their shows, and kind of predating how popular it's all become now. But at the time, I think just kind of seeing the trends in how things were going with the media and PR, and understanding, look, organizations need to have much more of a role in telling their own story. You can't count on somebody else to do it for you. There was contraction in the media, right? The traditional outlets were getting smaller, fewer staff. And so we both kind of were doing that over time. And then things worked out that each of us went into an entrepreneurial role, and we were working on consulting and some other things. And I had this view in my mind that I really wanted to build this network, and I just hadn't been in the right circumstance to do it before. And he had a similar thought, and we said, hey, let's do this. And so we started with basically 2 shows. He had the one he had already been doing. I started The Authority at the time, which now I'm more than 150 episodes in, so we've gotten somewhere. And then we went from there, and we identified, going back to the beginning of our conversation here, who's it for and what do they want and what do they need, right? And there was kind of these 3 groups that had a lot of overlapping challenges. Podcast hosts, like independent podcast hosts, it was a challenge. And you probably know a lot of these statistics. I think it was fewer than 50% of podcasts made it past 3 episodes, and only 10% made it past 20, right? Because it's a lot of work that goes into it. The way that the ecosystem is fragmented, you don't really know what everybody's doing, what's working for them, how do I get listeners? So there was a lot of folks out there who had good things to say and wanted to do it, but they didn't have that community. Same thing for listeners. They would have the same challenge, discoverability. If I like this, how do I find something like it? And the typical platforms weren't really that, user-friendly for shows especially in more niche genres. Education is the biggest category in Apple Podcasts, for example, and it encompasses a whole lot of stuff that can be very different from one another. So if I like this show about being a school leader, how do I find something like it? If I like this show about being a father, how do I find another one, right? And the same thing for, companies that wanted to advertise, partner, and sponsor. It's a full-time job. If you have to go to everybody individually, find out who's their audience, what do they do, how do they do partnerships. A lot of the folks doing it didn't necessarily have the business background. So, if we could bring this together, have more community, support one another, take a lot of the headaches out of the creation by, pooling those resources, and help one another to find great guests and to know how to build listeners, what strategies are working, right? What are all those things? And then have a single place for partners to be able to work with and know that they can have more of a reach and an impact in that partnership. It served all those needs. So we expanded by having a lot of existing independent podcasters join the network. We've launched a number of new shows as we've gone, seeing what some of those opportunities were to create things that were consistent with our audience. I'll use my 2 as an example. So The Authority was created more for the school leadership audience. And then after a while, I was thinking about it and saying, if you think about who are coaches and athletic directors, but particularly sports coaches in high schools and scholastic settings, what else are they doing? They're probably a principal or a teacher, right? And so a lot of those people are already part of our audience, but we don't have something that serves this other interest of theirs. I had started my career in the pro sports world, so I was like, hey, I haven't done that in a while. It'd be interesting to get back to that. We're already creating content for these people, but there's another thing that they're interested in that we could be, providing value around. And so we expanded like that. So the expansion's been thoughtful and strategic, but it's a lot of fun, and it's particularly gratifying, I think, to see the difference it makes for a lot of these folks in the way that they're able to feel like they're really succeeding. They're growing their shows. They have a community. They have people who can recommend things and support one another. When we have our people who do things and they collaborate with each other without asking for permission, that's always my favorite thing because it's like, great, we've created a community here of people who know that they're on the same team.
That's great. And, one of the things you said in there was that organizations need to be accountable, or take action for sharing information about what they do and who they do it for. And that is so key. I tell business leaders all the time, or small business owners, have your own podcast. There's no better way, one, to control the information that goes out there, but two, it gives your customers and prospects something to think about and learn, maybe even before they contact you. That is so key. What is one thing that you're super proud of that you've created? I know you just mentioned the cross collaboration, but what's one other thing that you're super proud of that you've created with this podcast network?
That's an awesome question. One of the things that we did, and this was really informed by experience that I had over several years of consulting with startups, was understanding the challenge of having any kind of sustained brand awareness. When you're a small company, you don't have a lot of budget. You can't invest in all of sales, marketing, communications at this stage, and you're having to make decisions about, okay, what can we do? And so maybe you get a one-off, you're on a podcast somewhere, but then that's kind of it. And so we created a cohort-based approach to have a series called the EdTech Startup Showcase, where a half a dozen companies would join, per year, and be a part of that, and keep having episodes come out, get connected with our other shows, and understand, okay, like, this is within the bandwidth of a founder and an owner when you're in that small type of business, to say, like, we need to show how that story evolves over time, right? Let's connect with some of your initial customers and partners, right? Leaders that you're working with, talk to them about the experience, and really, in a way, provide them, of course, with that media product, but with that embedded communications and marketing support, and really helping them learn how to refine and develop and tell that story. And so, I've really enjoyed that, because I knew how much of a challenge that is for founders in that way, and how, like, getting to, I think, with a lot of the companies in that space that are selling to schools and things, right, getting to that first 10 customers, it's like, when you're in that kind of zone, that's a really tough space to be in. I need more people to know about us, but we don't have the huge revenue coming in to start just going out and being everywhere. So what's a good way to do that? And what comes out of that is just, the chance to really see the evolution and growth of these companies as they're going through, as they're even getting a better understanding of what they do and who they serve. And it's been something that it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome, Ross. That's awesome. I want to recap a little bit about what we talked about. So we started off with vision and decision, touched on that for a little bit, which was great, and value prop, and the importance of clarity, and how that helps your team align their decisions towards that vision, and how critical that is. We went into talking about what are some of the key qualities that great leaders have that people want to follow and trust. And we did a little bit around the difference between corporate leaders and education leaders, and why people even leave the education field. And it's not because they lose their passion, but they feel like sometimes they just can't get things done. And then we kind of wrapped it up with, I didn't even do this on purpose, but almost a case study on the vision and decision with this brilliant thing you've created with your co-founder, Jethro Jones. See that name, you can't forget that name. And we talked about the vision and some of the decisions you made and some of the great outcomes from this wonderful B Podcast network. And so, what's one thing do you want to leave our audience with, and then tell us where we can connect with you at?
Excellent. Yeah. So I will leave the audience with this idea, and certainly I didn't invent it, and I'm sure they've heard it before, but we always need to be reminded of it. And with all we talked about with leadership and decision making and understanding the direction you want to go, don't forget to ask the question, what if it works? right? When you're feeling that pull or that whatever's holding you back from committing to a direction or from doing the thing that you kind of know you really want to do, but you're trying to maybe control outcomes in a way that you can't. What if it works? What if it does turn out really well? What might that look like? So ask that at least as much as you're asking, what if it doesn't work, right? If not a lot more. So I'll leave you with that. And yeah, if you want to connect further, LinkedIn is a great place. I'm on there as Ross Romano. I'm on Blue Sky as well, and my podcasts are The Authority and Sideline Sessions. You could find them wherever you're listening to this. They will be there too.
I'll throw in my links from those two shows in the show notes. So thank you so much, Ross, for having me on. You're awesome. Listeners, do me a favor. If you know somebody who's maybe in the middle of their career and they're stuck, you should send them this episode. I think Ross did a great job of sharing ideas around decision-making on how to get out of that binary thinking about that. So that's one. If you know leaders who are in, let's say, the education field, and they could potentially be losing their passion because they're frustrated, send them this. I think Ross is somebody who shows how passionate he is about the education field, and that will help inspire them as well, I believe. And Matt waving his magic wand idea. So it's always something good to be thinking about. What if it does work, like you just mentioned there, Ross? So thank you, buddy. And until next time, everybody, do me a favor, stay curious, keep learning, and have a great day. See ya.
You have to advocate for yourself, and you have to ask for what is it that you need. And that starts by understanding what is it that you need in this new role as a manager, right? What are the support, the resources you need